In part 2 of my interview with Jeremy Beer about his new book, Beyond the Devil's Road, Francisco Garcés in the Spanish Encounter with the American Southwest, we're going to learn more about who Garcés was and what made him unique and interesting. One of the things that Jeremy's book does so well is to give us insight into the motivations and the situations of the different people and groups that came into contact and often conflict in this time that in some senses is very different from our own, but from the standpoint of humanity, nothing really has changed in the 200 years intervening. So I think that you're going to be drawn in and that you're really going to like what we talk about. So without further ado, let's get into the second and final part of my interview with author Jeremy Beer. Welcome to California Frontier, the show about the often overlooked and unexpected early history of the place we call California. I'm your host, Damian Basich. So the title itself is Beyond the Devil's Road, right? So why this name Devil's Road today, and why does it figure so prominently in the story?
It's a great name, first of all, right? I mean, it's hard to come up with a better name for a road than the Devil's Road.
I mean, and the juxtaposition is great. You're talking about this Franciscan friar, but the Devil's Road, I mean, that hooks you in right away.
Exactly. Yeah, it's good. Works well for a title. As I said, it really was it wasn't called, they had no name at the time. El Camino del Diablo is still there today. You're still warned against traveling it. You have to get permission from the military to cross part of it because it goes across the Goldwater Air Force Range. It's pretty dangerous. And it was dangerous then. And it was also the northern limit, essentially, of what was known to Spain geographically, not just in terms of the landscape, but in terms of peoplescape. Was not known what lies north of there. Not really. Only a couple of other Spaniards had ever been to the Colorado River, north of its mouth. I mean, a handful to the Gila River in that area, and then beyond that junction, almost no one. So it functions symbolically and metaphorically, like that, to show what was unique about Garcés. So what his contribution was to spearhead sort of the Spanish penetration beyond that point. And then it leads to the question, like, well, and what was that like? I think, as things turn out, Spain never really made an advance beyond Yuma. And we can get to that part of the story. But if you wanted to have one, if they had, Garcés probably laid the groundwork better for a successful advance, better than almost anyone could have, because of the way in which he comported himself, his ability to connect with native peoples in a positive way, his affection and tolerance. It's an overused word, but I think it's the right word here for those he met, that almost transcended his time, I would say, and anticipated a different way of doing missionary work. So he's important in that regard. It turns out he didn't lay the groundwork for anything much bigger because of what happened in 1781, but it was a promising start.
In 1781 was the massacre, in which he lost his life, right, of the Spanish colony at Yuma, or what has been called the Yuma massacre. I don't know if that's the best description of it, but can you talk a little bit about that, and then I want to go back to talk a little bit about Garcés and how unique he was.
So just to tie a bow on the revolt, we might say, at Yuma. After the Anza expeditions have gone through, even before then, it's become very clear to this the Spaniards that if we're going to maintain this overland route to California, we have to have a presence at the junction of the Gila and Colorado rivers, which is where today's Yuma is, and we have to have friendly relations with the Quechan people who control that junction. In fact, the Quechans were the most powerful tribe in that area by a long shot, and they were disposed to be friendly, primarily because of their leader at that time, Salvador Palma, and leadership was very fluid, of course, as we know, in these sorts of groups. But he was pretty clearly the leader at this time, and was disposed to be friendly for all sorts of reasons we can guess at, but we don't know for sure. Certainly because of the sorts of things you got when you got a mission, and access to Spaniards, which is goods and food and guns, and well, you're not supposed to have guns, but all material things. That's certainly part of it.
His good disposition toward the Spanish was key in allowing the Second Anza expedition to get across the desert in the first place.
And the first,
right?
That's right. Yeah, and the first. When Garcés met him in 1771, he guided Garcés. It's really funny. Garcés thought he kept trying to trick him because he didn't realize he was on the Colorado River. He kept asking to be taken to the Colorado. Palma would take him. He's like, no, he thought it was the Gila because he had totally missed the junction. There was flooding at the time, and so it wasn't obvious that this was a new river. So it's kind of a humorous story. But they hit it off. It seems like. I mean, they certainly had a sort of very friendly alliance. Yes, Palma, if he were not well disposed, as the Quechans had not been previously in history, when a Jesuit named Father Jacobo Sedelmeier had gone there, I think in the 1730s, and there had been violence, and then that was it for a generation or more. If they hadn't been well disposed, I mean, that's it. I mean, the truth is the Spanish were almost always outnumbered on the frontier, even if they had slightly higher technology when it comes to the sort of means of warfare. So being well disposed is very, very important. So anyway, that lasted for quite a while, but the Spaniards, I think it's fair to say, unintentionally and unwittingly broke the limit of that patience among the Quechans. It's just a very tragic situation. Palma goes to Mexico City. When Anza comes through, he says, I want to go to Mexico City. I want to see. And are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. He goes. He's baptized in Mexico City with Anza standing as his godfather. He's showered with gifts and attention by the viceroy in his court, and is treated as a celebrity. He writes or allegedly dictates a statement that we can read today. That's very fascinating, and it's kind of hard to know how much of that is Palma and how much is Anza or others. But anyway, so it's all going great. But the problem is it really raises Palma's sights and expectations, and he's made a lot of promises by the Spaniards that weren't kept in terms of goods and when missions would be placed among his people and so forth. So things are deteriorating. Garcés is sent there in 1779, and a couple of other Spanish friars, or Franciscan friars as well, to settle things down. Ultimately, two small new colonies kind of formed on a new model are planted there, but the goods, the material stuff just never really arrives. And then the last straw in 1781, this is happening in June and July, there's another round of settlers coming through. They're actually on their way to settle, to found Los Angeles, what becomes Los Angeles, and just hundreds of livestock trampling Quechan crops, eating precious seeds and so forth. And it's just the last straw. And Palma has lost all of his prestige at this point, or almost all of it. And new, younger men who are itching for a more of a confrontational attitude rise up, and they slaughter the Spanish in July of 1781, and take a lot of captives as well in terms of women and children. And Garcés and 3 other friars lose their lives in that uprising. So that's sort of how it ends, and that's a thumbnail. That's the quick thumbnail. There's lots of drama involved in all that, as you might imagine. But that really ends not only for Garcés, but really for the Spanish in that part of the world. They really never establish a foothold there again.
And you do a good job of sort of describing the tension that's being built up, among the native people there, expecting that sooner or later they're going to be sort of showered with supplies and gifts and resources as the Spanish seem to have, promised. And then, yes, Palma sort of losing his grip and things going awry. But one of the things that I appreciate about how you wrote this book is you definitely give a lot of layers, right? You provide a lot of context and nuance to the really complex relationships between the missionaries, the native people, and their leaders, and the alliances, and non-alliances between the different native groups, and then the Spanish military leaders, the Spanish viceroy down in Mexico City. There's such a web of relationships and misunderstandings and everything that I think that you do a very good job of trying to see things from the perspective of the different players in this big game of risk, let's say, and I think that's to be commended. It must have been hard to try and do that.
It's really hard, and I'm sure I could have done better. It's really hard. And one of the things that makes it hard is, so we it's not that hard to get into the missionary perspective. It's not that hard to get into the Spanish crown's kind of perspective. It's not that hard to get into ranchers and miners, lay people on the frontier, although there weren't that many of them's perspective. It's hard, if not impossible, for us really to get into the native people's perspective, right? Because among other things, we don't have written records from them, and so it's that's where you have to try to be really careful and without importing our own anachronisms, right? So one, I think, thing many people may not have their minds around is there is no sort of pan-native sense of like collective identity. That doesn't come about for a long, long time, 20th century, arguably, right? And so, as you point out, there is constant violence and warfare on the frontier, Spanish there or not. The Quechans have their own alliance with various other groups. They're sort of the leaders of this alliance. The Pimas have their own alliance with various other groups, and they're kind of the leaders in that alliance. The Apaches are yet a third group that's not allied with either one, or might be shifting back and forth. The Hopi play a role here. I mean, it is not like there were the Native Americans and there were the Spaniards, and that's not what this was. And within the Spanish group, same thing. The missionaries have their own goals. The crown has its own goals. The military has its own goals, and they're not always on the same page, far from it. So yeah, it gets complicated. I wish it were easier to give the native perspective on this than it is. And that's just one thing. You just have to live with the paucity of sources and evidence. It's just makes it very difficult.
But I think you're part of a growing group of authors who are trying to do that, right? And but at the same time, also trying to tease out the different, as you mentioned, tease out the different motivations and standpoints of the Spanish as well. It made me think about the fact that you take this this biography of this Spanish friar Garcés, and you're clearly sympathetic to him. And he, in some ways, as you mentioned, is unique in his approach, or at least he's sort of goes against the mainstream in his approach to trying to spread Christianity among Native people, among the Indians of the Southwest. What was it about his approach that you would say is different to, say, most of the other missionaries operating in that space at that time?
Yeah. I mean, I've mentioned his courage, which was definitely sets him apart. That's the most extraordinary fact about him, I think. He doesn't have a theory. So there was no I have a new theory of how I'm going to do missiology. That's not him. But he has intuitions, I think. And again, because he's not a great writer, he doesn't necessarily articulate these very well. But intuitions on what the best way is to evangelize, which is his goal, right? And it's this really deep sympathetic identification, as much as anybody could have possibly hoped for at that time, from this perspective, a pretty deep sympathetic identification with those he's dealing with. So Font, a chronicler of the second Anza expedition, Franciscan friar himself, he has a very famous passage in his diary, or the journal of the expedition, that says Garcés is incredible. I mean, he's like an Indian himself. He'll sit around the fire all night with them and talk, or just sit in silence. And what's with this guy? That's sort of the implicit sort of thing that Font says, and everyone seemed to recognize that. And he was always called on to. That's why he was sent to Yuma, right? It could only be him. Only Garcés could maybe rescue this situation because of his ability to connect. So I don't know what that was. I'd say there's a kind of simplicity to it. A kind of artlessness is another way he's described once by one of his contemporaries. No guile in him. And also no pretense, no snobbery at all. He was just, sympathetic. The only Native Americans, the only Native group he ever had any tension with, until the very end, of course, at Yuma with the Quechens, which wasn't his fault, were the Hopi. And that seems to have been, for, again, factors not related to him. I don't know if that answers the question, but he's just unique in his. He also just was not. He wasn't an administrator. He wasn't a builder. He did not have any of those talents, and in part that also kind of insulates him from having to do any of the hard stuff that you have to do if you're in this position, right? Like, he didn't exercise discipline very often on his charges, if ever, at San Javier del Bac. He just sort of let things go there. There's not much evidence that he put a lot of effort into trying to build that mission. And he just wasn't attracted to, maybe just didn't have the stomach for, the kinds of paternalistic discipline that was expected of a Spanish, missionary, a pastor at a mission. And so that's probably good in the end, right? He just doesn't have that allowed him to connect and not have that other aspect to his character for people to think about.
Well, one of the things that struck me about your book is that you don't shy away from talking about the problems and the abuses that took place by not just soldiers and settlers, but by missionaries themselves, and that sort of, in a lot of ways, helped create some of the bad blood among Native people against the Spanish and against the church itself. But at the same time, you're not dismissing it all either. You actually mentioned that you have, here back to this word sympathy, that you have a certain sympathy for the people, the Spanish people, the Native people, but that you also highlight this person like Garcés, et cetera. I guess I'm trying to ask is, how did you balance that without becoming, once again, Manichaean, black and white, recognizing the bad things that happened? You also describe in detail the things that Native people did as well to each other and to the Spanish. So how do you thread that needle, or what was your thought process in talking about all these things?
Yeah, and I don't know how well I threaded the needle. I certainly try to, and I appreciate that. Just try to proceed from some basic principles that don't seem to me that controversial. For instance, like no cartoons. People aren't cartoons. I have no ideological lens I'm bringing to this at all, like preset, like this is how, there's no theory undergirding this, just really trying to be true to the sources. And then I guess the one theory I do have is like, we're all human. Everybody's human. And humans are a mix of bad and good. And that will come out in different ways, at different times, in different contexts. And that keeps you usually from having cartoon heroes or cartoon villains. And to recognize when people are going, I think for me, figures are worthy of sympathy when they are managed to be better than the average run of people at their time and in that context. Not just when they live up to whatever our own ideals are today. I mean, that's just impossible. It's asking too much. And so I think somebody like Palma, for instance, Salvador Palma, I will not try to say is Alekotekiebe or something like that. It would be his Quechua name, by the way. But he himself desired to go by Palma, it seems like, in the sources. So I think we can call him that. I think he's one of those people. I think he is. I have a lot of sympathy and admiration for him. I think he was trying to really do well by his people, and in a kind of a pretty noble and big-hearted way. And Garcés similarly, and there are certain people who don't reach that standard. But I think you just have to have very reasonable standards. So, for example, there's I give examples of priests, missionaries mistreating various groups. That I already mentioned, the German-speaking Jesuits on the frontier who have some guilt on their hands that way. There were Franciscan friars in the Hopi land who were also had committed terrible, heinous crimes against them. But then you have two, people like Garcés and others speaking out against slavery on the frontier, calling it an abomination, speaking out against mistreatment. Garcés himself liberated 2 slave girls, traded some much needed supplies for them as he was starting his 1775-76 expedition, and ends up encountering them back with their family and their people. I think they were Haushatoma girls on the Colorado River later, and took a lot of pleasure in that. I mean, it's hard for me to not see that as pretty laudable, even as we know there are the unintended consequences of like, well, you're perpetuating a trade, but what are you supposed to do if you're in his situation, and someone like him was acting to achieve the good as he saw it, as best as he could. And I think that's you don't have to agree with him on what that good, if it was good necessarily, but I think the motivation's pretty clearly laudable.
What would you say if you had to sum it up briefly? Or not so briefly? What would you say Garcés's legacy is, especially for us who live in the American West, Southwest, the area that he traveled through?
Yeah, I think 2 things for sure. I think if he doesn't find that route a usable route to Alta California, and then help make that Anza expedition, the first expedition of 1774, happen, it was very much because of him that it did. Who knows when San Francisco is founded, what happens there, and then everything cascades after that. LA. So I think he's a significant figure in the settlement, the Spanish settlements or move into Upper California. And I think things could have been a lot different historically were it not for his pathfinding and alliance making and friend making there at Yuma with the Quechens. He also, and there's a man named Peter Whiteley who's at work on a book on this, which I'm really looking forward to. His diaries are a source of really significant ethnological data that some groups on the lower Colorado, the only real data we have is from Garcés. I say data, I mean anything, not just numbers, but like information about how they lived and so forth. So I think he left an ethnological legacy, even though he's certainly not a scholar, and someone who was a better writer might have left more useful writing for us. But then again, they never would have been where he was, probably on his own doing what he was doing. And then the third really is from the perspective of his work as a missionary. I think he anticipated a different way of doing missionary work that we would see, not that there's a direct line from what he did to what came about later in the 19th and 20th centuries up till today. But he certainly is somebody you could look back on as saying here's someone who anticipated a different and better model. It was a more patient and understanding and model that relied, and it privileged or foregrounded the need for sympathetic identification more than an approach that didn't do that. So I think that would be his legacy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that I think we need more stories, more knowledge of people like him who communicate a not only heroism, courage, but also a bridge between different peoples, different cultures,
right.
even different groups with different aspirations. Right. I think that's really
right.
really interesting. So another curious question, but you live in Arizona. Did the fact that of where you live have something to do with this interest in Garcés and the fact that he spent plenty of time there in what's today Arizona?
Yeah, entirely responsible for it. I only picked up, it was Robert Kittle's book, Franciscan Frontiersmen, that led me to this. And I only picked that up because I saw, I was looking for things about Arizona's past. I've been here for 16 years. I like to know the history of where I am and to search for great stories in those places. So, yeah, absolutely. I was looking for an Arizona book to write. And this just happened to be what sort of came out of that search. He's not known, Garcés, in Arizona any more than he is anywhere else, as far as I can tell. There are two statues of him that I know of in the world. One is in a traffic circle in Bakersfield.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a really kind of an Art Deco period.
I think you have a picture in the book, right?
Statue. There's a picture in the book. Yeah, it's very interesting, but not. I wouldn't say it's the most prominent place in Bakersfield or anywhere else for a statue. And then there's also one of him, also done around the same time, at the St. Thomas Indian Mission, which is located exactly where Garcés's mission was of the Immaculate Conception in 1779 to 1781, just across the Colorado River from Yuma. And so there's a statue of him in front of the church there. So that's kind of, but to my point though, nobody in Arizona thinks about him or knows about him to my, you see his name on a couple of things here or there, like a Knights of Columbus, parish council or something, but not well known. So it was a way to make him more known to Arizonans was definitely something I wanted to do.
All right. Well, when is the book out? Is it out already or is it out soon?
September 17th. So I don't know when this is coming out, Damien, but that's the official release date. You can order it already on Amazon and places like that.
Okay, so when this airs, it should be out already. That's great. Beyond the Devil's Road, Francisco Garcés and the Spanish Encounter with the American Southwest. And this is part of the Before Gold series of the University of Oklahoma Press.
Thank you, Damien. I really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the California Frontier Show. If you'd like to support the show, the best thing to do is to let other people know about it. If you'd like to support it monetarily, there are a couple ways of doing that. One is by scrolling down in your podcast app to where it says support the show. There you can become a subscriber for as little as $3 a month. And if you want to give a one-time donation, just below you'll see where it says give a one-time donation. Finally, the show is supported by California History Teachers, which is a full year of lessons for 4th grade California history and social studies. You can find out more at www.californiahistoryteachers.com. And if you input the coupon code PODCAST, you'll receive 25% off your monthly or annual subscription. So check it out.